So in my last analysis, I said that the first episode presented the audience with 3 points about the show. The first story, textbook, sets up the point that our main characters usually interact through games and challenges. The other 2 points that the first episode leaves us with are both found in this story, Skipping Stones. Based on the manga's 64th chapter, you can find this story in episode 1 at 16 minutes and 20 seconds. Now, this story is somewhat similar to Critical Hit in the way that most of the story serves to set up a big climax. However, instead of half-heartedly running through the entire plot like I did in Critical Hit, I will just talk about the parts of the story that serve this overall analysis. The first point worth bringing up is the game that Takagi suggests to Nishikata. If you can hold my hand, you win. I don't know about you, but when I first saw this, I assumed it was there because it was in the original manga chapter, and also to add weight to Nishikata's eventual heroic act. Who would have guessed that this one line would be foreshadowing the entire character arc that Nishikata would slowly but surely go through over the course of this season? So now we skip ahead to when Nishikata botches his first throw. What really stands out to me about this moment is how Takagi managed to distract Nishikata, how it is somewhat similar to what she does in Empty Can. The difference being that in Empty Can she played off his easily embarrassable nature, whereas here she plays off his competitive spirit. Another interesting aspect of this strategy for Takagi is that it introduces us to a minor aspect of this season. I don't think it would be controversial for me to say that in most physical activities, if played head-on, Takagi would be outmatched by Nishikata. Given his exercise regime that Takagi herself fuels, in a direct battle of brawn, Nishikata is almost always going to come out on top. That is why Takagi needs to make up for what she lacks in physical strength with her superior intellect. We see this here with her distracting him while he makes his throw. We will go on to see it in arm wrestling where she plays off his arrogance, and this will more or less be confirmed in Revenge when she straight up admits that he is just too strong. So this next point is a bit of a stretch, but I figured I'd tell you anyway. The moment Takagi sees the crab at face value is there to explain why Takagi is distracted for what happens next. However, the fact that Nishikata stops himself from looking over makes me wonder if this story is even more full of foreshadowing than I had thought. I mean, what other part of the show does Nishikata miss out on seeing something cool with Takagi because he is given into one of his most common character flaws? Who knows? Finally, we get the moment. Nishikata is so excited to have found a perfect rock that he nudges Takagi, putting her off balance and sending her falling towards the water. In response to this, Nishikata grabs her hand out of pure reflex and uses so much strength to pull her back that he winds up flinging himself into the water instead. This brings us to the second main point that is being brought up by this episode, that these two, despite the teasing and the games, genuinely care for one another. We always knew this from season 1 stories like Water Tap, but this goes to show just how far Nishikata will go for Takagi, putting himself in physical peril. You may argue that the only reason his reflexes reach out for her is that it's his fault she's falling in the first place, and I don't have anything more than anecdotal evidence to disprove that. I just don't think it's the case. We've seen before that when Nishikata doesn't let his brain get in the way, he is able to act in accordance with his real feelings for Takagi. We saw this in Critical Hit when his brain was preoccupied, and now again here, where his brain doesn't even have time to think through what he is doing. This next section of the analysis will be discussing a spin-off manga called Karakai Jozu no Moto Takagi-san. The premise of this spin-off series does contain spoilers for the mainline manga, so if you would rather avoid those, you can skip to the timecode below. In Moto Takagi-san chapter 95.5, Takagi, Nishikata and their daughter Chi go to the same river that Skipping Stones takes place by. During this story, there is a moment where Takagi is about to fall back into the river, but Nishikata once again reaches out to grab her hand. This time, however, he has the strength to pull her back up without throwing himself into the water. After this incident, the two reminisce about the events of Skipping Stones, and they both seemingly have different takeaways from it. Nishikata compares the two scenarios and concludes that he has changed since then. He attributes this change to his increased strength. But Takagi disagrees. She looks at his instinctual reaction to grab her hand both times and concludes that he hasn't changed. At least, not his good traits. Following this, we see the pair walking home. Takagi's sad expression clearly reflects her regret that Nishikata had gotten hurt. As we saw back in Watertap, there is a line between which of his misfortunes she finds entertaining and which ones she finds troubling. Nishikata returns Takagi's handkerchief, which she had lent him to help dry off. Now, some of you may be wondering why this handkerchief only appears here. Why not further involve an item that was so crucial to Nishikata's character growth? Well, the answer lies within the question. The handkerchief was tied to a bout of character growth that Nishikata has already done. In Season 1, the handkerchief is a crutch. In seating arrangement, returning it was Nishikata's excuse for wanting to sit with Takagi. But by the end of the story, he comes to realize that returning the handkerchief was not the reason he wanted to be near her again. The reason this season doesn't revolve around the handkerchief again, or any inanimate object for that matter, is because Nishikata has moved past that. Season 1 was about Nishikata coming to terms with the fact that he wants Takagi to be a part of his life. This season is about him learning to overcome the obstacles that he puts in the way of that happening. The conversation these two have over whether they held hands or not is here to set up a contrast to the end of the season. While he did technically hold her hand, it was an accident, a reflex that he had no time to think about, and he ultimately walks back on it. By the end of this season, he will perform that action completely intentionally, not without excuses, but without having to jump through 1,000 hoops to justify it. The conversation is also here to give viewers a little more insight into Nishikata's priorities. We have already discussed in the textbook analysis that he doesn't want to be teased, but something I didn't go into is his desire to win. This aspect of his character often exacerbates or even straight up creates conflict for him, but he keeps doing it because winning against Takagi is one of his primary motivations. But when he's in a position to claim a win, he turns it down, because doing so would mean admitting an intimate moment had just happened between him and Takagi, and right now he'd rather take the loss than admit that. The last point I'll bring up about this conversation is Takagi's facial expressions throughout. She seems nervous, asking him about whether or not he held her hand. This takes us back to another point I've made in the past. Takagi's biggest weakness is intimacy. She might one day want to enter a romantic relationship with Nishikata, but she couldn't handle that kind of relationship right now. Just like the critical hit shocked Takagi because it was seemingly a huge leap forward for Nishikata, this too is a seemingly huge leap forward. What he did at the lake could be interpreted as a sign of affection, and if holding her hand is something that he is now able, or God forbid, willing to do from now on, it may be too much for Takagi to handle, thus the nervousness. This is also why she seems to relax a little as Nishikata denies holding her hand. I can't help but feel she's a little disappointed that he isn't there yet, but by the end of their walk she seems more relaxed. The story ends when the pair parts ways. Takagi tells herself that she thought she had lost, and Nishikata wonders if what had happened could be considered hand-holding. This final interaction, along with some other smaller hints throughout this episode, conveys the third and final point of the show that the first episode is introducing us to. These two are in love with each other. So many romance anime, even some romance anime that I like, is based on a will they won't they kind of story, where the main conflict is whether or not the main characters will ever enter a relationship together. Karakai Jozu no Takagi-san is not a show about will, but rather a show about when. These two are already in love with each other, they just lack the emotional maturity to enter a romantic relationship. Nishikata can barely admit to himself that he might have these feelings at all, and Takagi is still too flustered by intimacy. In my first impressions video for this episode, I said that Skipping Stones was the perfect story to end this first episode on. And I said that because the story has just about everything you need for a great story. Nishikata challenges Takagi and loses because Takagi turns the tables on him. We have a moment of vulnerability from both characters, and Nishikata, the more timid of the duo, shows that he cares for Takagi more than he is willing to admit. And that is it for Skipping Stones. Make sure you subscribe for more. If you want to see the outtakes for this video, you can do so for free on my Patreon page. And while you're there, if you would like to donate to my Patreon, I would appreciate it more than I could possibly put into words. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.